My friends at Easy Cater are workplace catering pros, helping you find food for everything from daily employee meals to staff meetings and special events. Visit easycater.com/leaderassistant to find out more.
Hi, I'm Nadine King, and today's leadership quote comes from Mark Zuckerberg, which is one of my favorite quotes. Ideas don't come out fully formed. They only become clear as you work on them. You just have to get started.
The Leader Assistant podcast exists to encourage and challenge assistants to become confident, game-changing leader assistants.
It's episode 45.
And here's your host, my dad.
Welcome, friends. This episode is going to be a fun one. I'm talking with Nadine King, longtime executive assistant. So yeah, it should be a really good chat. I hope you enjoy it. Be sure to check out the show notes at leaderassistant.com/45. And again, join our online communities at slack.leaderassistant.com and facebook.leaderassistant.com. One more thing, be sure to check out our online courses at assistanceguide.com. We've got a few courses on there now. We've got more courses coming soon at various price points and a variety of topics. So assistanceguide.com. Hey everyone, thanks so much for tuning in to the Leader Assistant Podcast. It's your host, Jeremy Burrows, and today I'm super excited to talk with Nadine King. Nadine, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for asking.
So what was your very first job, and what skills did you learn that you still use today?
Well, I'd say my very first serious job was working in banking. I was a teller branch supervisor, but I also was considered like the right-hand person to the operations manager there. So I kind of assisted her and some of the operations of the office and overseeing the tellers. And the skill set I used there, we did a lot of cross-training. So just kind of learning other departments, being open to collaborate. And that's something that I've kind of carried through my career.
Nice. So it's kind of sounds like a very assistant type job that you started off with.
Yes, I did.
Nice. So when and why did you become an executive assistant?
Well, I kind of, moved on to doing some administrative work in different churches and things like that. And there was a time in my life where I had an opportunity to become the EA after doing those types of jobs to a lady who was a CEO of 7 different companies or organizations. And she was very dynamic, very fierce, go-getter. And so that opportunity came during a very hard time in my life. Actually, I was going through an abusive marriage, and it's crazy and how God works and the universe works. But, it came about during that time, and she, had the resources to help me out. And I became her assistant, and then everything kind of took a turn there, and I learned so much. And that's when I found out that I had a passion for it and could do it very well.
That's awesome. So what have you loved about the role?
The variety, the day-to-day opportunities to face like so many different types of challenges. From one day I could be, running errands, to the next day sitting in a board meeting, planning a luncheon or entertaining some execs. To the next day being the nanny if the nanny wasn't available. So the variety of being able to not grow stale in what I was doing. And that's always been exciting to me.
Yeah, me too. There's never a dull moment, right?
Yeah, never a dull moment. Never a dull moment. It's always it's great. And especially when you are an EA to a very dynamic person who's a visionary, and they have goals, and and they see your worth and your value, and they bring you along. They bring you on board to kind of help reach those goals. So that's always been exciting.
That's great. So what has been maybe one of the most difficult parts about being an EA?
I think it's sometimes dealing with the people that are not in your seat. So if you are an EA and you kind of play the first stop before the person gets to the CEO, like your other coworkers or colleagues, and and you have to kind of help navigate, kind of play the doorkeeper per se. It's kind of difficult when some people don't understand the role that you play, or the value that you bring to the organization. And I think that's hard. It's kind of hard navigating your colleagues, their perceptions, what they think of you, what they don't think of you. And yeah, I think that's been one of the most difficult things.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's a very can be a very lonely role. It can be a very isolated role, and it's hard for people to understand the role unless you've been in it. Yeah,
exactly.
So, do you have any crazy stories, or instances that you maybe saved the day, or were asked to do crazy things during your career?
Yeah, so many that I'm trying to find the craziest, and that's, oh man, when you say crazy, like just,
like family friendly crazy.
Oh yeah. I mean, of course that, but, I
like funny
think that,
or ridiculous.
Or funny. I had a moment where, you can become so close sometimes to your executives, especially if you're a female assisting a female or a male assisting a male. And there was a time where I had to help the lady who cleaned the house, kind of navigate some things. And I saw my boss's underclothes, and it was a moment of just like, oh my God, is that really her? And, the maid kind of tried to pick them up really quick. And I was like, oh, and it was just kind of like one of those moments where you chuckle, you're like, oh, did I really just see her bloomers? I thought that was funny.
That's funny.
It may not be funny to somebody else, but that was funny.
Yeah. You kind of get to see, the good, the bad, the ugly, the dirty. Yeah. You get to see a little bit of everything, don't you?
Yeah, you do.
So what was maybe the biggest mistake you made as an assistant, and what did you learn from it?
Recently at my job, we, this is the most recent actually, just like a week ago, we had an event. It's the opening event for the campus, and everybody attends, from the president to the staff, all of the students, the new students. And there was a blip in the program. Well, not a blip. With the provost's script, she was asking me, should she go up on stage? And I actually told her no, not to go up on stage. And she should have been up on stage. And the choir that was supposed to sing, the Glee Club, they were stalled. And it was just like the longest. It was probably like a 1 to 2 minute delay, but it felt like eternity. And I just, it was bad. It was all my fault. And one thing that I did is I reached out to everybody that was affected by this mishap, because you could hear it in the auditorium. It's like 700 people there. Everybody's like, what's going on? And my boss is looking at me, and her boss is looking at me, and everybody's like, what do we do next? And it was a moment of just like, I wanted to go into my shell. Even with my years of experience, you still have those moments where you're like, man, I screwed up. But I made sure that I kept in mind that I'm still human. And I think one thing I learned from it, even though I used all of the tools that, are at my fingertips to own my mistakes and tell the truth when you did something wrong and you did something wrong, and you apologize. And I reached out to those individuals that were on the program, and I gave a formal apology from deep within. But I think this time that actually what I learned from it was that although I made that mistake, I'm okay. It's okay because I'm human. And I think sometimes we become so engulfed in doing things perfectly that we forget that we are human and we don't have to be as hard on ourselves as we normally are. Because I'm kind of a perfectionist in some ways in my work and what I do at work, that I'm like, it's got to be right. It's got to be right. And if you put so much pressure on yourself, I've put so much pressure on myself when I've made mistakes. And so sometimes the lessons are you learn from the mistake to say, oh, I won't do that again. But this time in making the mistake that I did, I said, I'm not going to beat myself up like I normally would and walk away where I've got a headache. I'm stressed out the rest of the afternoon, which I kind of was, but I had to keep talking to myself and pulling myself away from that ledge and realizing it's okay. And then my boss later that day, she came to me, which was a very, very, it was a shock. And she said to me, she said, April, and my first name is April. My middle name is Nadine. So just so you'll know, but she said, April, she said, it's okay, because everyone else came to me after the fact and said that it was a really good program and they didn't see it the way that you saw it. Mm-hmm. And so, sometimes our mistakes become like these, they're really small, but then they become these big monkeys and gorillas on our backs and we carry it. And I just learned in that moment to let it go.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. I talk a lot about confidence and how I think one of the best ways that we can have confidence is by remembering that no matter how well or how poorly we perform at work that day, we're still a valuable human being.
Yes, exactly.
So you've been an executive assistant, but you've also been a virtual assistant. So talk a little bit about maybe the biggest difference, other than, physically being present in an office and not, maybe some of the biggest differences between the two, and then which one did you like better?
Oh, wow. There's a lot that I like about both of them. And then you said other than because there's freedom, of course, without being attached to the brick and mortar. What did I like most? I think there's a lot of autonomy that you have. Well, even in our roles as EAs, there is a bit of a lot of autonomy that you have. But with being a VA, the amount of being creative with my projects or being more creative with how I construct my day and how I construct my time was I loved it because I know when I'm more inclined to have, all of my, what I call attention sales focused. Mm-hmm. I know when my mind is more alert. So being able to work around that and maximize my potential when I knew that I was hitting on all cylinders. That's what was exciting about the freedom that I had with being a VA. And what do I like? That's kind of difficult to answer because, in the role that I play now, I really, really love my job. I really love my executive and I love what I do and I'm very passionate about it. I love the mission of the institution that I work at. So to say, what do I like better? That would be kind of difficult. But the difference between the two would be that the freedom of, being able to do work when I wanted to do it.
Yeah,
and when but not even just when I wanted to do it, but when I knew that right now, like at this very moment, I've got the power. I'm about to produce something great, and then I could just hone all my energy at that very time.
Yeah, I like the working from home part of, you can much more easily avoid the distractions of people coming by your desk and bugging you because you're just not there.
That's crazy because I always talk about how my door just seems like it's constantly swinging. Somebody's always knocking, and I don't get work done until everyone's gone.
You have a door?
Yeah, I do. I don't have a window though, but I do have a door.
Oh, that's awesome. I'm jealous. I'm in an open office, so I still have I have one cubicle wall. Well, I guess I have two now, but I've like the only one that's has it because I've been holding on for dear life to I don't want them to tear down the wall.
Don't tear down the wall.
So, what's your number one tip for managing an executive's email?
My number one tip, well, it's kind of two-ish, I guess.
That's fine.
Flagging and color coding for managing. My number one tip for managing anything in the office is I never, ever use one way of organizing something. And what I mean by that is that I always have a backup of how I organize things. So, for example, I think you should be flexible. Every EA should be flexible in how they organize. Sometimes we can get so strict that we're like, I only do it this way. Mm-hmm. But let's say that you color code, you use sticky notes, you flag, and you write in a notebook. Well, for me, even with managing emails, calendars, whatever, I make sure that I write something down in 2 different places on my 4 different methods that I have. And the reason being is because there's days where it's really chaotic. And if I only wrote down everything I needed to do in my leather book or something, I may not pick up that leather book that day. So I may be looking at sticky notes, or I may consider taking time to look at all of the follow-up flags that I have, or all of the things that I've color-coded red in my email. So I'm very big on doubling the process. So if I see an email and the email says schedule this meeting such and such time, I don't have time to look at it. I'm going to flag the email, and then I'll grab a sticky note and I'm going to write down schedule such and such meeting, and I'll stick the sticky note that day. And then the next day I may, flag the email, and then I'll put it in my leather bound book. So then at any given moment, nothing falls through the cracks, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, just being flexible and using whatever means necessary, and not being so, bent out of shape when you can't do the system you want to do.
Right, but the 2 is the key. The 2, doing it double is the key. So whatever you use as your method, which I'm sure most people have multiple ways of organizing things, you always write something down or organize it where you have it written down twice at minimum, because then you don't forget.
I was going to say, do you see that more as a memory thing, or as a, because you mentioned a backup, do you think it's more of a memory thing, like just ingraining that into your head, or is it equally as important to have the backup?
It's equally important to have the backup. I think it helps. But because I've noticed there's days I remember one time I used to just put everything into my own online. I said, okay, this is going to be my way to organize everything. My to-do is in this smart sheet, right? Mm-hmm. So I've got all of this stuff in smart sheet. And then there's been days that I don't even look at the smart sheet, and I'm looking at sticky notes, or I'm going through all of my follow-up emails, or I forget to look at the smart sheet. And then I look a day or 2 later, but I've looked at. So my thing is, it's not necessarily, it helps with memory, but I've coached some EAs in doing this, and they're like, it really does work. It's just the whole follow-up system where you're backing yourself up with something so it doesn't fall through the cracks.
Nice. So you've done some assistant coaching and training. Mm-hmm. How did you get into that whole world of helping other assistants?
Some of it has just been I've done a lot of it through my church. I do believe that administration is a gift, And it's something that people who are good at it, the Greek word for administration is kermenesis, I believe is how you say it. And it's somebody who can steer the ship, the captain of the ship. So I've done a lot of it that way. I've also done it at the institution that I'm at, just people asking me to be a job coach for their administrative assistants. Just help guide them along the way. I have one-on-ones with them to make sure they're good, to get them to a level where they're operating and at a certain capacity. Just putting my name out there, done a couple of forums and a couple of panels to just, getting my feet wet.
Nice.
But it's been an honor to have people that, respect the work that I do where I work at and love the excellence that I put into it. And so they ask and I serve.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So what's maybe one tip that you would give an executive to help them get more out of their assistants and really utilize their assistants well?
Know their value. Sometimes it takes time to build trust from an executive's viewpoint. They may not trust the person, but know that they do add value in some sort of way. And so if you lean on that, saying that, okay, I know this person can add value. You may not quite know how yet, especially if you're a new executive with a new EA. Maybe you've never had one before. If you come in with the mindset that this person can add value to me as an executive, they can help me reach my goals and they can help me achieve certain things that I probably couldn't achieve in normal time. If you come with that perspective, then you will open up the door and the opportunity for them to show you the value that they add, or how they can change your life, or how they can assist with you reaching your goals. But just know off the bat that EAs do have value and they add value to your work.
So is there something, I love that, by the way, is there something that assistants can do when they feel undervalued or aren't being respected or recognized?
Besides jump ship. No,
well, seriously, sometimes that's the best option.
Yeah, and it's crazy because I had an opportunity to speak to someone that recently that asked me personally to coach, not her boss. And she was the opportunity, the ties were severed. But and that was a question, like, how do I get this person to see that I add value? And no matter what tips I gave, it was just something like, okay, you can finally see that the conversation would need to be had with the executive as well, because it's a two-way street. It's a two-way dance, and sometimes they just don't know, they don't know how this relationship should work. And, I'm talking about executives, they may not be aware. And, they don't know how equipped we are, so it, you can sit there and you can give all the tips in the world. Like you said, jumping ship may be the only option if that person never sees. I think being considerate of what they feel and what they think, I'm talking about the EA's perspective. If you are considerate and take into consideration how they feel, and why they may feel like that may gain you some more patience in how to deal with them. But then be consistent. And then while you're being consistent, just be aware and knowledgeable that this is how they feel, right? They don't value me right now. And if you are aware, then you can own it. You can own it and you can steer the narrative the way that you want to steer the narrative. But if after you've done all that, the only option sometimes may be to jump ship. Mm-hmm. And especially if you're one that's a go-getter and you're not wanting to grow stale and, allow something like that to define you. And there's other dynamic executives out there that understand the value that you bring to the table, that would be willing to take, like, yes, I need you. Then that may be the only option. But, like I said, be considerate, be consistent, be aware of what they're thinking, how they're feeling, own it. And then after you've done all that, and if it doesn't change after you've given some time for that consistency, then you might want to look at other options.
That's great. So speaking of dynamic executives, what does type A mean? And how would you encourage assistants who work with a type A executive?
Well, I know there's like this textbook thing about type A's and anybody can Google it. But most of the time when you say type A, most people are talking about an executive that's very goal-driven, goal-oriented, results-oriented. They're very aggressive. They're not passive. They're very direct. They can come off as dry, honest, and they're just like in your face. This is what it is. This is what it's going to be. And you can't change it. Can't change my mind. And so that is what I always think of personally when I think of type A. And what was the question? And how do you work with them?
Yeah. How would you encourage assistants who work with a type A executive?
Well, some of the pointers that I gave with just dealing with someone who doesn't see your value, because sometimes type A's can be a little harder to jump on board, or they can be a lot more difficult to kind of see your value. So there's that dynamic too. But I still believe in what I stated before. Being consistent with type A's is very important, and being honest with them is very important. So you have to know where they're coming from. A lot of times type A's are straight shooters. And so when you're dealing with them, if you know where they're coming from, if you know why their approach is their approach, it's pretty easy to deal with them. And you can't have your feelings on your sleeve. You can't wear your emotions on your sleeve. When you have someone that is a type A, they're aggressive, they're not a pushover, and they don't want an EA that's a pushover. And so you've got to get a backbone. In my book, I talk about that, having that steel, titanium, diamond, whatever type of wonderful stone or metal you believe in. You've got to have a backbone that's just like that strong when you're dealing with a type A. So kind of learning to have those types of skills where you're not easily offended, where you're able to take a lick and keep on ticking. These are some of the things that are important to have when you're dealing with type A's.
That's great. So speaking of your book, it's called The Ninja, Chronicles of an Assistant, right?
Yes, sir.
So tell us a little bit about it, and how did you come across just, writing a book? When did you decide you wanted to write a book?
I decided when I was asked to, like I said before, at my job, I've been asked to do some trainings and, people that know me outside of work. And, I've spoke at different places and they're like, you should write a book. And what's crazy is, Jeremy, I'll tell you, is that I think I had imposter syndrome dealing with this. If I'm saying this correctly. Yeah. I was like, okay, yeah. I'll write the book. And, but when I started writing it, I became fearful because I was like, I don't think I really have much to say. So I kind of punked out. Right. And I said, well, what I'll do is I'll just write a manual. I'll write like a little 5-page manual. This is what I'm telling myself, right? Mm-hmm. When, people are like, oh, you should write. And see, my husband, he writes. And so he was encouraging me to do the same. And it's like, you should write. I'm like, I don't think anybody's why would I write a book? So I was like, okay, what I'll do is I'll just write like this little manual, a little conference pamphlet or something that I can share with people. And it's unassuming, right? So I was like, yeah, I'll just do this. And in my mind, I was thinking, if I do it like this, then if they read it, great. But if they don't read it, it doesn't really matter because it's only like 5 pages, right? It's only like 5 or 10 pages. You know how they do the little pamphlets, where you do like the little ring, and I already had the little comb thing that you bind the book with, and I'm like, I'll just put the little plastic combs on it, just put something on it. And it's like, oh, okay, yeah. So I start to write it, and I was like, okay, I'm going to make 3 to 6 major points. In order to be a great EA, you have to have great time management skills. You have to know how to manage temperaments. You have to be detail oriented. So I started writing it out, and I just kind of like was typing out like some of the key points that fell under those particular overarching themes. Right. And so I'm typing out, and I got to like, no joke, I got to like 3 pages, 11-point font. It was like not double spaced or anything. So I'm like, yes, because once I format this and double space it, I'll probably be like at 5 pages. So maybe I'll go to like 7 or 8. This is how I'm talking to myself. Right. and so I decided I was driving home, and like my spirit was like, okay, you're doing yourself no justice. Like, you have such a great story to tell. You can tell it in the way that you tell it, and you're doing yourself no justice. And I kind of shook it off. So then one day I was at my office during my lunch break, and nobody was in the office, and I decided to read it out loud. And I printed it off, and I started to read, and I was like, and I'm paraphrasing here. I was like, okay, in order to be a great executive assistant, you have to know how to manage temperaments. Managing temperaments is blah, 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 right? And so I'm reading it out loud. And as I'm reading it out loud, I literally felt like crap, because it was like, this sounds nothing like you. This is not you. This is not you at all. And so I plopped down in my seat. I remember plopping down in my seat and thinking, this is not you. This sounds boring. This is dull. Who wants to read, throw it away. So I balled it up. I deleted everything I wrote, and I started off, and I wanted to use my middle name as my pen name, which is my middle name is Nadine. So I started off at the top of the page, Nadine King. And I just allowed myself to go into a place where my creativity could flow, right? Because remember, I talked about, I love being creative, love being, and I just started typing, and I talk about this at the very beginning of the book that, I had approached this process of writing this book. I thought I was going to do this research and I had all these different ideas and this manual and blah, blah, blah. And it just didn't pan out that way. And that it panned out in a way that I needed to just tell my story, because my story was important. My story has value. It could definitely enlighten those that are EAs, those that are not EAs, that are entrepreneurial minded or whatever. It could enlighten them, and I could tell my story in my own words. And I got freedom from that. And I just started typing. Typing. And then, I did voice to text, driving home. And so a lot of that was the whole process of how the book came together. And, but it didn't start off that way. It started off with me just not really believing in myself and not believing that my story could definitely add value to the new wave of us bringing attention to leaders or assistants as leaders. So.
That's great.
Yeah.
Love it. I'm working on my first book, so it's fun to hear other people's struggles and stories of how they kind of found their voice and the writing process. Do you have any tips for, I know there are a lot of other assistants I've talked to, they're like, oh, I want to write a book on this, or I want to blog on this. Do you have any tips, just general writing tips, or maybe even just tips on how to finish a project like that?
You know what? I will say that I used, which was helpful to me, because my boss, she wrote a book. It's called Rising Road, A Tale of Love, Race, and Religion. Her name is Sharon Davies. And if you ever see this book, it's actually becoming a Hallmark movie, I believe. So it's super, super thick. And I mean, she's a scholar, and for her to tell me, she's like, oh my God, you achieved this while working for me and being a full-time mom and working in your church. And how did you do it? And I felt so accomplished. I was like, oh my God, thank you. I mean, it's not like it's 500 pages or anything, but and so she asked me the same thing. She said, how did you deal with just being so busy? You know what? I used Evernote and Google Docs, and I did a lot of voice to text. And so that is one, like in my car driving home, I'd have my earpiece in my ear and I'd be talking into it while of course it's typing out, and then would get home and make any corrections that I needed to make. So if I had to be honest, I probably typed 40% of that book and talked 60% of it. So I don't know if that's the kind of tip that you were looking for, but
no, that's great.
Yeah, I think that, there's so much technology out there, with dictation and things that we can do to kind of get things done a lot faster, where you're not actually sitting there and your fingers are going numb because you're typing. Yeah. And so if you've got a great dictation device or something like that, and you could talk into it, that's a great tip. And I did it wherever I was, whenever an idea would come, I would speak into it. And then when I got home or I got time on the weekend, I'd piece it all together.
Love it. I've definitely thought about that a few times. Like, okay, nowadays you can get transcriptions so cheaply.
Oh,
like maybe
wow.
I could just record myself talking and then send it off and have it transcribed, and then I just edit it. So.
Yeah. See, I mean, it's just technology is so much on our side right now.
Awesome. So, what do you think makes an assistant a leader?
When they can problem solve and make decisions on behalf of their executive, and they just know. They know what needs to be done and they do it. I think that's what makes them a leader. Because the more that you can keep off of your executive's desk, the more that you can keep away from them having to get into the weeds of things, means that you're leading. You're really, really leading. And then when you can come to them with a finished product, when you can anticipate their needs and you can come to them and say, I knew you would need this. I've already handled it. Here you go. Here's the finished product. Then they're really, really leading.
Yes. Amen.
Amen.
Awesome. Well, Nadine, thank you so much for taking time out of your evening, and just loved hearing about you and your story and your tips and wisdom for assistants. And how can we support what you're doing, and where can we find you online and all that fun stuff?
Awesome. You can find me at www, of course, the Kings and the King's Court. It's spelled, I'm so sorry. It's spelled with a Z. So it's the KING, Z as in zebra, Court, COURT.com.
Nice. And I'll put the link on the show notes so people can find it easily. And then, everybody should check out your book. And
it's on Amazon.
Yeah, Amazon, good old Amazon. I'll share that link as well. And yeah, thanks so much again. I really appreciate it. And hopefully we get to meet in person someday.
Likewise, I would love to. I hopefully can come to either St. Louis, or I don't know if you ever make it to Atlanta, but I would love to do that. That would be great.
Yes, definitely. All right. Well, have a good one, and thanks again.
Thank you, Jeremy. Have a good one.
I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Nadine. Check out the show notes at leaderassistant.com/45. Talk to you next week.
Please review on Apple Podcasts. GoBulls.com